Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tom Fortin. I'm chief of the main library.
And I'm Michelle Jeffers. I'm the chief of community programs and partnerships for San Francisco Public Library.
And we're going to talk about Night of Ideas, which was a special program, after-hours program that we held here at the main library. And Michelle was the creative genius behind this. I just pulled her out of her office so that she could join me, because as I was going through my presentation, I'm like, I'm going to forget things, but Michelle actually ran everything. So she's going to help me make sure that I don't leave any gaps.
And Tom's going to do his presentation in French.
Yeah, right. No. So first thing is Night of Ideas. It began in 2015 as Night of Philosophy and Ideas. And it's actually a program that's pushed out of Paris to French embassies and consulates around the world. One of the first libraries to respond to this was the Brooklyn Public Library, working with the consulate in New York City. And it's kind of taken its own life from there. But the idea is that on one night, the French embassy network is connecting all these communities across the world to come together to discuss one broad topic and to encourage community to come together and talk about issues that are important and critical to the day. So Michelle was responsible for getting us going, and we're going to try to run through a bunch of the details, things that might interest you in terms of, like, if you were interested in running a program similar after hours for a bunch of people, some things to consider. But this is the beginning slide, and I think this is hilarious because, you know, how many people had heard of Night Ideas before you saw it on the program today? Wait, SFPL people, put your hands down.
Yeah, not SFPL.
Okay, so some of you actually heard about it. Okay. So, you know, I can imagine this looks like, oh, this was a pretty cool party, like getting all these people here until 2 a.m. in the evening on a Saturday evening. But like, to me at the time when we took this photo, this was a nightmare because we didn't, you know, initially we're kind of like all of us when we do programs, really worrying that no one's going to show up, but you know, 6,000 people showed up, and this is a security nightmare, and I'll go into that in a second. And you know, and we tried to talk about Night of Ideas to staff probably the July. And this was in February. We presented it. We started talking about it with staff in July, and I'm not the best person to explain something kind of like this, but you know, people didn't really get what you're talking about until we showed them the video. And there's a video that was produced by Brooklyn Public Library. Again, Brooklyn Public Library was the other library to adopt this Night of Philosophy as an after-hours special event, and they held it at the Central Library in Brooklyn. Oh. Okay.
So this is an event of 12 hours where people can gather, think together, meet. And with this event, we show that philosophy is accessible and that everybody can get access to it. We make it easy for people and cool.
This evening sets the tone for the 2018 season at the library and beyond. All of you gathered here in our lobby are proof that against the odds, we will hold tight to knowledge, we will not shy away from complexity, and we will do the hard work of listening.
The notion of community is extremely important. You have cum in Latin, which means with. And you have also munia, communia. The munia is in Latin gift. So community is the sharing of gift.
more tangible, it makes philosophy more accessible, and also visible.
We want always more diversity, more people of everywhere, but we can see that all the generations, for example, are there. Young people and older people.
It's a genius idea, not surprisingly, coming from Paris. It's very European, so I'm actually really happy that joining forces with the French embassy, we actually make this happen in Brooklyn, in this vast building where philosophy, ideas, and art is happening all over the building.
We have effectively transformed the space of the Brooklyn Public Library into a space of philosophically eager insomniacs.
Thank you for being awake.
I've been an activist since I was 16 years old. And for me, philosophy is a guiding point to make the world a better place.
And it really does feel like love will last forever when we first fall in love.
What do we think about when we think about football? Football is about so many things, so many complex, contradictory, and conflicting things. Memory, history, place, social class.
And what I really enjoy, right behind you, there are people dancing and other people drinking, dancing, wandering within this space. And that's so lively.
One of the real great joys of coming to a library is that you're there with everybody, and so you're experiencing things together in a way that you can't anywhere else. And to me, that is probably the most exciting thing about Night of Philosophy.
I am really grateful to the evening, to the people of Brooklyn and New York City, because they understood what matters for us, to be, listened to be understood, and that ideas can move the world.
So after you see that, you kind of get it, right? It's like a bunch of programs that you might be doing normally, but stringing them all together at night after you're closed and having a bunch of people show up. So when we were first approached, Michelle was the first point of contact, and maybe you just want to talk about that a little second.
Yeah, and believe it or not, I said yes to this before I saw that video. So we had a long-standing partnership, we still do have a long-standing partnership with the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and we did a really cool exhibit here when the museum was closed for renovations as part of the SF MoMA on the Go. And so the curator of public education there approached me, the French consulate approached him about doing this event at SF MoMA. And SF MoMA said, I know we can't do this. Let's talk to the library, and we'll be the go-between. So they came and we had a meeting, and I was naively enough thinking, we'll just do it in the Correct. It'll be easy. It'll be nothing. I hadn't seen this video. So, and we ran into our boss, Michael Lambert, the director of the library that day while we were here at a meeting, and I said, what do you think if we opened after hours for this event with the French consulate? And he's like, yeah, sounds good. So all of a sudden, that was it. We were committed to doing it. But I'm really glad that we took the risk, because it was definitely worth the effort. It was a lot of effort, but it was definitely a really wonderful evening for us.
So then Michelle brought it to me and a few other people who work here at the main library. And once we saw the video, we were on board. Again, conceptually, just listening to it, we're like, well, we're never open after hours and on a Saturday night, and how are we going to staff that? And so this is the main library, and of course we could only hold something like that here at the main in our system. But staff who work here, maybe some of you are familiar with the neighborhood, the very first thing that I thought of is like, well, okay, February, so it's going to be raining. And generally, as soon as we close the doors on Saturday at 6 o'clock, at 5:55, there's people camping in each one of those alcoves and any other alcove on the building. So there was a lot to kind of think about and a lot to kind of just work through in conversation that we can address these issues, working with our partners in like outreach to homeless groups, our partners in public works, our public SFPD. So it all kind of came together. Sorry. And again, our two partners were the Consulate in San Francisco, and they have a really great staff. We worked with their cultural affairs person, and about 3 or 4 other core staff. And from SF MoMA, again, about 3 or 4 core staff from SF MoMA, and then Michelle and some staff here at the main library that support the system in the main library, and we had probably like 100,000 meetings. And we came up with this concept of, we didn't want to be each responsible for coming up with a million different ideas for programming. So what we did was, with all of our partner networks, which they have great networks, Michelle has great networks, we started thinking about just assigning different periods of the evening and different spaces to different curating partners. And then, so these are some of our curating partners, that's not all of them though. And then we started building out this spreadsheet. So you can see that we used, I think it was maybe 9 or 10 different areas of the main library. By the way, at Brooklyn Public, they run theirs from 7 p.m. until 7 a.m. Sunday morning. And on our first try, we were not ready to go out all night long. But we decided to go from 7 until 2, so we could have a little bit of party time in there. And starting at 7 o'clock, we use spaces like the atrium, and then you'll see the different spaces as they lay out. Again, you know, when we were thinking of it conceptually, we're like, well, what if no one shows up and we've gone through all this trouble, whatever. We purposefully limited it to 4 floors. So there's actually 7 floors of public service in this building, but we limited it to those 4 floors so that no matter how many people show up, it's gonna feel like really engaging, really active, like the place to be on that Saturday night. And then you can see that we started earlier in the evening with more spaces, and then we kind of had fewer and fewer spaces as the evening went on. I do want to say that we reached out to Brooklyn Public too, because we were like, so how did you guys do this? I think they had done it twice at that point. But I don't know, if anybody works at Brooklyn Public, forgive me, but the people that we spoke with weren't very helpful. And then, so we kind of winged it on our own without really learning from someone else's experience. But I think our record shows that we did a pretty good job. And of course, one of the first things that you think about is, well, how are you going to staff a Saturday night until 2 a.m.? Because like all of you, Saturday is one of your busiest days, and you have all your staff working on Saturday. So, and we weren't going to close, we were going to have the building open most of its regular hours. So then working with Michael Lambert, who's in the audience back there, we got administrative support for giving extra hours or extra hours to part-time people, or extending people's day with comp time or very limited overtime. But in the end, you know, like when we would show the video to staff to get them interested in working that night and helping us out, we had like 100 people volunteer. And we wanted to start with the first year as being as liberal as we could, getting as many people interested and active as we could. And so staff was very interested, and we're very grateful for that. And then the evening started at 7 o'clock with Beach Blanket Babylon, with one of the singers singing San Francisco, Open Up Your Golden Gate, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So, and that was a crowd pleaser, of course. And then in this room we had, at what point was KQED brought on? KQED was brought on as one of our partners.
Yeah, they were brought on. Maybe we had approached them about being like a media sponsor and getting some advertising on KQED, and then they were so excited and had a new events producer that they're like, we want to be a full partner, we want to come in and do a live broadcast. So we had Michael Krasny from Forum here on the stage doing 2 hours of live radio with panel speakers right here.
And then that was actually archived too, and it was played again a couple different times on KQED, so it was great exposure for the event. But you can see this room was full, and it was actually to overflowing, which brings up the point. So this was, for the evening, we had to do an Eventbrite registration, right? I think a lot of people are doing that now for different types of programs, because you need to have a sense of how many people are going to show up. And for this as an after-hours program, we really only wanted, well, I have to be careful about how I say this. We wanted to include people who were engaged, and that meant that they went into Eventbrite and signed up and registered. There is no fire code number for this building. Like, we can't say, oh, we have to cap it at a certain number of people. It's then it's the limit and we can't let new people in. But of course, when we did the Eventbrite, it wasn't very long before we had over 12,000 people registered to show up that night. So suddenly I know, right? And then suddenly the concerns about, well, what if no one shows up? So then our
what if everybody shows up?
Yeah, what if everybody shows up? And, so this room, as you can see, was fully occupied to its limit for the extension of Michael Krasny's show. And then, so this is, so we're like, okay, so what kinds of performers are we going to have, working with the French consulate? Is there going to be mime? And these aren't mimes, but they are performers who do dance to no music.
Yeah, site-specific.
But you can see we were incorporating performances into the evening as well, so it felt like an event for everybody. And this is just on one of the floors. Again, so here you get a sense of the size of the crowd, and this is JR, who's a French artist who has an exhibit right now at SF MoMA. And I think he was probably the most popular speaker.
Yeah, he was our biggest draw, and we got him committed really early, and that helped to get others to commit, because he signed up because of the SF MoMA connection really early.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the Eventbrite registrations happened when people started noticing that he was going to show up. This is hilarious because this shows the security problems. The building got so full at one point that it started to feel uncomfortable, like it's a safety concern at this point. What if, God forbid, something horrible happened and we had to evacuate the building? So we were always aware of that, but we don't have a lot of experience with doing this. So I love the guy who's straddling the, what do you call him, the stanchion. These people are sitting on the floor. This is in the atrium. The atrium really, when it was full like this, it cut off access to other parts of the building, and it really created a security concern. And for staff, we all recognized what it was, but I'm not so sure that a lot of the patrons, I think they just enjoyed it. They were like, it's an event. This is a happening place to be tonight. This one, I love this shot because we tried to do keynote speakers in the atrium, and the atrium is not the best space to do that in the end. We learned this because the acoustics are really horrible. But it works great for visual performance. And this guy is actually a friend of Kathy Del Nero, who's the chief of branches. And he did this acrobatic thing where he was like spinning around on this wheel, and it was mesmerizing, and it was a real big hit. But for us, we learned that the atrium really works best to visualize and see something, but not so much to linger and to hear a presentation. And Felicia.
Felicia.
So the earlier list of all the different types of programs, we tried to spread them out across those 4 floors I was talking about. And if you've ever been in the Hormel Center, this is the Hormel Center on the 3rd floor. So we had a queer-themed series of programs happening in this space. And we timed all the programs at 20 minutes. We tried to keep it engaging. We tried to keep people, like pithy conversations and not long and drawn out. But again, this space, I think we set up 50 chairs, and there was probably 100 people in there. And it was great to have all these people interested, but you start worrying. I wanted to show this photo because Michelle and her team did a great job creating maps of the building with all the list of programs. And this was critical because you might think that you could do this on an app or other ways of doing this, but really handheld paper really served the best vehicle for looking at that kind of information. And of course, now we have them as souvenirs. I wanted to show this one. This is in the children's room. And because this is a reminder to me about the AV setups. And Rich is up there in the, the booth right now, and Kenny's back there. We couldn't do AV setups in all of the spaces where we were having programs because we don't have enough equipment. So we were trying to encourage the presenters to present without AV or without PowerPoint. And really, let's keep it low tech, let's keep it focused on the conversation and learning from each other. But in some of the spaces, we had to give up.
Yeah, I think if we asked Rich, it's probably most of the spaces ended up with a screen of some sort.
And then this is one of the supporters of the program. There was some private money that was available, but all the rest of it was unbudgeted, and it was just squeezing money wherever we could. But in this one, there's a art gallery in San Francisco. The owners are French. They were on board with the French consulate. And they had this creating art installation outside. And by the way, I haven't mentioned yet that it was pouring rain. Again, when we figured February, it's probably going to rain, but it poured. I mean, like, it poured all night long, and we had people waiting in line to get into the building. It was memorable. But this is something. Here's something that you guys do, right? Like silent yoga. I'm sure lots of libraries have done that program. But have you done it at 12 midnight on a Saturday night? So that was fun. And then this is a reminder for me and Michelle. I think when we were hoping to do this again this year, and I think festive attire is going to be required. This guy had festive attire, and I think we could encourage a lot of fun participation with festive attire at this year's version. And then this is Dominique Crenn, who is French, and she is a famous chef in San Francisco. I just wanted to highlight her because planning this event, it was difficult to line up keynote speakers. You can never be early enough on someone's schedule. And we first heard about it in July. It took us a couple months to figure out that we were going to go forward. It was probably October before we actually trying to schedule program presenters and performers. And at that time, even for beginning of February, a lot of people just weren't available. But Ms. Crenn was, and she had a big following as well. And then this is Michelle, who is back here in the audience. And I wanted to show this because, and I was the stalwart on this one. I was like, we can't offer library services that night. It's gonna be too much of a headache. Anyway, staff like Michelle was very progressive, and Michelle was at the children's desk on the second floor, and she and her team were making library cards, right? That's a natural kind of outreach for a program like this, so that was wonderful. And we left the self-checks on, so if people managed to find a book while they were like running around to different programs, they could check it out. So that was really smart on everyone else's part but mine. Yeah, Michelle! And then I just, a couple regrets. I spent entirely too much time on this slide, but I had to look up, is regret in French the same as it is for English? Anyway, one of the things that we didn't do right was we didn't include enough of our staff earlier on in the planning. So that is something that we are trying to correct and bringing more people involved. I mean, Michelle and I and Kathy attended like 1 billion meetings, but we should have involved more people earlier on. I think we probably also would want a more diverse cast of program presenters and performers. I think we tried, but I don't think we did a very good job. So that would be something that we need to change. We only had one entrance open, and we had staff manage the entrance by looking at Eventbrite and what have you. We wouldn't do that again. I think it led to too many security concerns. We have 3 entrances. We'd probably use all 3 entrances. We did have food and wine in the building, so that was a hurdle, getting okay for wine. And any regrets, Michelle? Any others?
That there wasn't more wine? No.
I think the other thing is we limited it, again, purposefully to try to make it feel really engaging by squashing a bunch of people into a small space. But if we do it again, we're going to open up the entire building. One of the jobs that we had for staff was elevator operator, because we were only open on, up to the 3rd floor. And our elevators, you can't lock them to 4, 5, and 6. So we had to have staff in the elevator. The other thing is we would have more time to train people in advance of the night. And overall, it was a great event.
But I think despite all those regrets, like we had one person who cut their finger, like that was the only incident all night. So it was actually really pretty smooth, despite our fears.
Yeah, and I don't know if I mentioned this, but a lot of the evening we have a live feed over the internet to our people counter, so we could gauge how many people were in the building at any one time. And it's like it's an infrared. It counts the number of bodies that have come into the building. And when we got to 3,000, and only on these 3 or 4 floors, we had to cut it off for a moment. But then we held people up in the rain, so we felt horrible about that. But in the end, it was kind of a miracle that we didn't have any security issues, and we had great staff and a great lineup, and people really appreciated it. I'm just going to leave you with this, which is our video, and I'll let you decide whether or not we did as good as Brooklyn Public.
The Night of Ideas is a free debate for fun and for all. During one night, we'll have 100 speakers and artists meeting with thousands of people from every background you can imagine and debate about the future of our world. And the topic here in San Francisco is the cities of the future.
Welcome to your Bibliothèque Municipale de San Francisco. It is so wonderful to see this building packed on a Saturday night. We have not had this many people in here since we first opened the doors 23 years ago.
The American Public Library is the most democratic institution in this nation. Continue to test us, continue to ask more of the leaders, continue to ask more of people such as myself.
So I just want to leave you with one thought, because we're at the Future of the Libraries. I think one of the important lessons that I've learned, and this is... just one of the lessons that I've learned, and I've learned this from Michelle, and I think really important thinking about our future is saying yes to partnerships. And it's gonna pay back all the time, right?
Don't be afraid, just say yes.
Yeah. So again, like, we learned a lot. We have a whole new slew of partners. We reintroduced the main library to a lot of people who hadn't been here or hadn't been here for a while, or people who had security concerns about coming here, as you can imagine, in our neighborhood. So say yes, and great things will happen.